good old fucking
So, with
Dragon
Dragon Age the
Veil,
Veilguard,
or
there have been a
yeah,
lot of
Dragon Age,
attempts,
whatever
in
the
my
fuck it's
opinion,
called.
to convince the general public that this game is something that it really isn't, to convince you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears,
Well, it's not even Dragon Age at the end of the day, so
what you've been
it's
seeing in
not even
trailers
Dragon
and
Age.
previews, and believe that the Dragon Age DNA in Veilguard, specifically its gameplay, is anything more than a very thin coat of paint. And
They're just using the Dragon Age, logo to basically try to sell this game, because they can't make their own game, so they have to take it from the actual source.
as someone who played the game for about 7 hours a few weeks ago, well, I guess my thesis statement here is that it isn't. A thin coat of paint is more or less exactly what Veilguard has to offer longtime fans. And any serious, level-headed discussion about this game is completely hampered by what seems to be an almost universal refusal to just say that out loud. Before I get to what I mean by that, and I think you're gonna want to hear it as this has been a tough video to make as a once very big fan of these games, but before we get
The only one that I know from that
I want to
list
hear
or
it as
so,
this has
right?
been a tough video to make as a once
The only one that I know from this specific list or so, from the trailers, I saw a trailer for the Dragon Age 2 one, and then I saw my friend play Dragon Age Inquisition, and that's pretty much about it.
very big fan of these games, but before we get there, I do need to take a really quick second to first thank the sponsor of today's video, New World PC of Eternal with X and S and PS5. Now, for really quick context on how I had the chance to play Dragon Age the Veilguard, EA were nice enough to invite me to check it out, which I did very much appreciate.
Well, we all know this for a fact. He's not gonna be brought in anymore.
I'm a big-time Dragon Age fan, and if you look at the other games I cover and tend to love on this channel, it sure fits right in, but I left the Veilguard recording event with a small pit in my stomach, because I knew that the honest way I would describe this game would be about the last thing most Dragon Age fans would want to hear. Now, I don't say that from a I had a terrible time and the game has no redeeming qualities perspective, but instead from, well, you know what? Here's a good way to put it. My prediction is that there are going to be two games that Veilguard will constantly be compared to. One in terms of gameplay and the other
God
for
of War.
tone. On the gameplay side of things, well, if you haven't been able to tell by just, using your eyeballs, Veilguard's combat and exploration is full-blown, or at least 85% blown, God of War 2018 worship. This new Dragon Age is all about the action, building up a rage meter to release an ultimate, getting your perfect parries in, shield throws, talismans that activate special abilities, plenty of pots to break and chests to open, you get it. Point is, somebody really liked God of War 2018 and said, why don't we just do that and be done with it? Now, that's not all there is to say about combat, don't worry, we still need to get to where that thin coat of paint even comes into play, but the other comparison I think people will constantly make, this time in terms of the game's tone, is to that Guardians of the Galaxy game from a few years ago, and this is the point of the video where some of you recoil in horror and maybe projectile vomit, but it's also the point where at least some of you are probably thinking, hey, those are two
I do want to play that Guardians of the Galaxy game. I heard it was a really good game.
not bad at all games. You could do much worse in terms of comparisons, and yeah, if you're thinking that, I completely agree. In fact, I'd go as far as to say God of War 2018 is a great game. I loved it. However, the reason I even
I
bring
have
those
it, but
two
I haven't
games up,
played
and the
it.
comparisons to Veilguard I'm sure are going to be out there, is this. Imagine if 6 months ago, we don't have to go very far back, only before that initial reveal trailer, but imagine if 6 months ago you, or even better, some imaginary person, let's say, had gone to the Dragon Age community on Twitter, Reddit, wherever, and said that what you wanted out of the upcoming Dragon Age, which at that point had only been teased, was God of War, action above all else, hack away at your enemy's combat, combined with a story matching the tone of the Guardians of the Galaxy game. Now, I don't care what kind of Dragon Age fan you are, whether you're an Origins-only type of person, or you started with Inquisition, or maybe you're like me and find things to enjoy in all three games, whatever the case may be, there is no denying that the Dragon Age fanbase of just 6 months ago would have torn that imaginary person apart for merely suggesting such a thing. Yet ultimately, that's the type of game BioWare have made here, and that's why I left my play session with Veilguard having that pit in my stomach. Not because what I played was the worst thing ever or because it didn't have redeeming qualities. I mean, I could have said Veilguard is like the story of Gollum combined with the gameplay of, well, just Gollum again, but I didn't. No, I felt the way I did because I knew that what I had just played for 7 hours was far from what most Dragon Age fans had been asking for, and I think BioWare have put themselves in a let's say, an interesting spot here, because the game they've made is absolutely going to put the existing Dragon Age fanbase through a pretty fine strainer, and the question is, what percentage of the fanbase is coming out the other side of that still wanting to buy Veilguard? They've tried to make a very palatable game here that could appeal to everyone instead of, directly targeting their own fan base and hopefully breaking out from there.
Maybe one day I'll play the older Dragon Age games. I think I have possession or so of the Inquisition one, I think.
Ideal approach in my opinion, but that said, this is the type of game where once it's out, the people who end up enjoying it for what it is, and that's a phrase I want to return to in a minute, for what it is, but those players are absolutely going to end up saying things like, hey, it's a good game, it's just not a good Dragon Age game. I mean, I can see the comments already, I'm sure you can too, and I bet before I even finished that sentence, you knew where it was going. That's the thing though, Veilguard as a quippy action-adventure is trying pretty hard at times and has its moments. It's just that a quip-filled action game is not what most Dragon Age fans were asking for, and in my opinion, you can't put any blame on the fans who feel like this is just not what they signed up for. Anyway, that sums up my thoughts on the general direction BioWare have chosen to take with Veilguard, and now I want to shift into my not particularly happy thoughts on one other specific part of the game, and also I'd like to talk about the combat and writing through that for what it is lens. I will say that if you're hoping for a bunch of character creator talk at some point, maybe my ranking of the top 50 eyebrow colors in Dragon Age the Veilguard, well, I'm sorry, but I spent like 3.5 minutes making my guy, and while it may be shocking that I didn't spend an hour and a half carefully adjusting my character's bulge size, I had good reason for it. I rushed a bit through the visual side of character creation because I wanted to get to something I was pretty...
Past Adventurers, the Inquisition default. You can customize the main character and a few events from previous games, Dragon Age Inquisition. This will have some minor effects on the story, but can be skipped if you wish to move on.
Excited for. Something BioWare have been talking about openly for months now, the set your past adventure screen before the opening mission, which apparently would let you import your choices from previous games. If you're a Dragon Age fan, you know that has always been something that set the Dragon Age games apart. The respect for your Theta.
I'm gonna be honest with you, the graphics or so for this version of Dragon Age or so looks way better, to be honest. I don't know, for some apparent reason the other one just looks kind of like plasticky, looks kind of like fake, looks kind of weird, you know? I don't know, I'm not really a huge fan of the art style for the new one.
And your choices from game to game, and well,
I think I like the realism
is
more
that I
on
was
this one.
incredibly disappointed when I found
it kind of gives me more like Witcher 3 vibes, which I kind of like the Witcher 3. I haven't finished it, right? But I wouldn't mind, doing a new playthrough for the Witcher 3 because I kind of forgot most of it. But like this would be pretty cool to play on stream or so.
Out that Veilguard allows you to import a grand total of, wait for it, 0 choices from Origins, 0 choices from Dragon Age 2, and just 3 from Inquisition, the game that Veilguard is a direct sequel to. If you want to know which 3 specifically, if you don't, skip forward like 15 seconds, but the only things you can set are who your Inquisitor romanced, and then the 2 choices from the very end of the Trespasser DLC, whether the Inquisition was disbanded and whether you vowed to stop Solus. So really, story-wise, all that matters are the last 5 minutes of Inquisition's DLC, and everything else across the trilogy that had choices, Veilguard will just have to avoid mentioning, because, as they told us at the event, in cases where they don't know what we did, they just avoided those subjects, or referenced them vaguely, so nothing was directly
So basically you're telling me they never played the old Dragon Age, is what you're telling me. That's what it basically feels like. It feels like they just kind of like watched like just 5 minutes of the end of the DLC or so, and then that was pretty much about it. I was like, okay, this is all it is to it. We're just not gonna play, we're not gonna play the entire game because we all know for a fact this is not the same. This is not the same BioWare team that they did in the past. This is definitely a new version, a new age or so of BioWare. So we all know this for 100% fact that this is not the same old team. So they don't know anything about the Dragon Age. The Dragon Age, franchise. So they just probably searched up on the YouTube video like the last 5 minutes or so of the choice or something like that, and then they're like, okay, those are the things that we decide to do, and then someone said, what about Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age 1? And they're like, no, they're old, they don't count,
contradicted or too confusing to newcomers. And BioWare are doing this very strange thing with Veilguard, where on one hand, it's a direct sequel with a bunch of returning characters in prominent roles, Yet on the other, it's a borderline soft reboot trying to minimize every direct tie to the past in an attempt to, I guess, avoid scaring off non-Dragon Age fans.
It's stupid.
And to me, this whole past choices situation is
the reason why that too was like you're also alienating the old Dragon Age fan base too as well. The people who has been there for like ages and waiting for a new game to come out, that you're just kind of like, yeah, we're doing like a small fresh reboot with this new art style, even though it doesn't look great or anything like that, you know, because apparently their heads are massive compared to their fucking body proportions. Apparently, you know, it's a pretty terrible body proportion size, you know, and yeah.
is yet another example of Veilguard taking something that once made Dragon Age really stand out from the crowd and reducing it to a shell of itself, which is a shame. I mean, say what you will about Dragon Age 2, for example, but that game was notoriously rushed. BioWare had to throw it together in like a year, yet guess what? It still managed to account for almost 20 choices from the game that preceded it, while still telling its own story. I just think
That's
BioWare
impressive.
could have and
That's
should
actually
have done
pretty
a lot
impressive.
better than 3 choices total. This game has been in development forever, and to be clear, it's not that I was crossing my fingers hoping for forced cameos and shoehorned callbacks where Veilguard winks at me just for the sake of invoking nostalgia, but the appearances of certain returning characters are going to feel pretty hollow now, knowing that they don't know their own past, and knowing that Veilguard is going to have to awkwardly dance around certain subjects because of it. Oh, also, before we get to the for what it is conversation, I am now realizing that I've yet to comment on the whole art style thing, but honestly, there's a really good reason for that, because what else is there to say, exactly? Everyone's talked about it already, and if you know my channel, you know I'm not the type to turn a 2-sentence topic into a 10-minute video. So, in short, yes, the game looks cartoony, the less that's said about the Qunari the better, and sure, all the main characters have massive heads.
Yeah, they have massive heads, you know. This looks better. Like the before, you know, like
It's cartoony, the less that
this looks so weird. Like it really looks terrible, to be honest.
said about the Qunari the better, and sure, all the main
This is after,
characters
and this is before. You can literally tell how big their heads are. They do have some really big ass heads.
have
This looks normal. This looks fine. This looks good. I like this. I just don't like whatever the fuck the other thing is. Maybe if there's some mod or so that brings it in or so that makes it like, you know, better or so, maybe, you know.
massive heads for some reason, like someone spent a little too much time admiring their Funko Pop collection before designing them. There's
guess
no doubt
so.
that art direction is super important, but this
It feels like they
grab
grabbed the what is that tool or so from the art program or so, the weird inflation tool or so that you kind of like inflate fucking drawings and shit. That's basically what it gives me. I forgot what's it called or so.
has been beaten into a fine paste, and there's just nothing new for me to add to the conversation. What I'd actually like to quickly talk about, though, is, well, if you're willing to jump through approximately 37 hoops for Dragon Age the Veilguard, how is it as a fairly lighthearted, very linear-feeling action-adventure soft reboot, which, hey, if you're physically recoiling at that description for a Dragon Age game, again, I get it, and I also understand if your interest in Veilguard died at Hoop 4 or Hoop 9 or Hoop 27, but hey, I don't have any skin in this game. If you can't tell at this point that I'm being completely blunt and honest in this video as a longtime fan of these games, well, I don't know what to tell you. I just want this to be a useful impressions video where no words are minced and you can really walk away feeling like you got the full picture. And in saying that, I think it's interesting, for the sake of conversation, to go, okay, taking the premise of Veilguard being a kinda whimsical action game, is it at least a good kinda whimsical action game? I mean, I like some action games, and I don't hate lighthearted things as a concept. I mean, that's not really something I wanted for Veilguard, but that's the point. For what it is, how is it? The answer is, well, obviously through that lens, parts of Veilguard are way easier to look at in a positive light. Some things, like certain enemy designs, are awful whether you're comparing them to previous games or not, but there were parts of Veilguard that I did like. First and foremost, and honestly, this is first by a huge margin, I really enjoyed the starting companions you meet right at the beginning of the game. Harding returns from Inquisition, I liked her there, also liked her in Veilguard, maybe even more, although
Okay.
I am assuming at some point they're going to introduce a plotline where she gets kicked in the head by a horse or something and just, you know, forgets about what happened in the last game, so it can't ever be referenced. Sorry, I'll let it go now. This is supposed to be the For What It Is section. I also liked Nev. I'd describe her as BioWare's attempt at a Yennefer type. She's a very cynical sorceress, or not sorceress, mage, that's very to the point, down to business when there's work to do, but when you talk to her behind closed doors, there's obviously way more to her. The opening also has Varric involved, of course another returning character, and While I won't say how much he is or isn't involved in the rest of the game, kind of a spoiler, I was happy that he still felt like Varric to me, just an older one who isn't really fazed by anything because at this point he's seen it all. After the opening companions though, it's more complicated, at least for me. 3 of them I had very little time with, but the other 2 I actually could form an opinion on were Lucanus and Bellara. Bellara didn't really work for me at all, she's the quirky one, and I'll leave it at that, and Lucanus, well, in my opinion, the premise of his character, there's something underneath the surface with him I won't spoil, but I felt the entire premise of this guy suffered quite a lot from Veilguard sanding the edges off of certain things. I haven't been saying Veilguard has a light, breezy tone just for the fun of it. I mean, in my 7 hours of playing the game, there was really only one 10-minute sequence that I'd describe as being remotely dark, tonally. This is not a spoiler, but in Bellara's introductory quest, there was a small section of it where you come across a village that's been overrun by blight. Many innocents had died, and it was reasonably atmospheric, although I did almost groan when in the space of 15 seconds the game hit me with a, "It's quiet. Too quiet," immediately followed by, "This barricade, was it built to keep something out?" Pause for dramatic effect. "No, to keep something in." I mean, if you're gonna hit me with lines like that, I feel like you really gotta space them out. Give me some distance between the cliches, but hey, that's a nitpick. Anyway though, my point is that I would bet if you go around to other previews from people who also played Veilguard, if they mention that the game can be dark at times, they're gonna use footage from that one 10-minute sequence because it's really the only example from 7 hours of playing, other than, I guess there was a boss fight we couldn't record that visually at least was dark, a boss fight I really liked actually. But back to companion talk, I would say the companions I mentioned positively were by far the most interesting thing to me about Veilguard. I really liked the conversations you could have with them back at the lighthouse, which is your base of operations in this game, and I always like the idea of approval-disapproval systems in games, which Veilguard has with the choices you make and your companions' reactions to those choices. As far as the choices themselves, well, before I say anything else, know that Veilguard is a very linear game, or at least it feels that way 99% of the time. Sure, from the lighthouse base of operations, you can decide what mission you want to do. I don't believe things are all forced in a specific order, but ultimately, once you're doing a mission, which is what you're going to be doing most of the time, you're being funneled down a set path with little offshoots here and there to find some gear or an optional enemy, maybe. There's not much player freedom in that regard, but what have the potential to make things interesting are the choices.
I think me personally, like, if I was head controller so for this one or so, I would probably make it semi-open world, like have like, you know how like Wukong, you know how like how Wukong is or so, right? That has like a little bit of some semi-open worldness. I think I would do something specifically like that. I don't know if I would do open world, because then the problem is specifically with open world is that you have to have it a little bit more in depth or so with everything like that, which I wouldn't mind doing a more open world-esque, but the problem is I need the right people for the right job. That's the only problem. And unfortunately, a lot of the new devs or so, a lot of the new blood, devs, not all of them, but a few of them are not really super great, to be honest. They're not really great. I know there's probably some that are pretty good, which I give them commending or so, that they're still holding down the line or so, still working with these kinds of people or so. It's understandable because there's not really like other studios that like can do, can actually, have the passion basically, but I would definitely do like, I guess you can say like almost like Wukong kind of esque type of way. No invisible walls or anything like that, but I would try to find a way to make it semi-open world, right? Make it a little bit more, maybe have a few linears, semi-open world, and then maybe have an open world zone, probably in that sort of nature. I would do something like that when it comes to this game, specifically for the way how it's kind of structured and how it's kind of done and everything. And also, I would probably get rid of this art style. Not really a huge fan of this art style. I'd probably go back to the realistic one. I'd probably head towards like Witcher 3, kind of like Witcher 3 status or so on the graphics. How you described it, that's how Inquisition was, really? I never played Inquisition, so I wouldn't know. So that's basically how I would do it. Just because I don't really put too much confidence or so on the new gen devs or so, right? At least for some of them anyways. To do an actual proper open world game, that's the only reason why. If I had an actual team or so who was actually properly well trained or so and know how to like do certain things and catch little certain aspects or so, like bugs and like glitches, and doesn't take too long or so to finish a certain thing or so, right? Then I would do an open world type of way, you know. But I don't know. I don't know. I think that's how I would do it personally.
In my 7 hours, most of the decisions
Just because I don't have full confidence in them. That's the only reason why.
I got to make were pretty small in terms of scale, but one of the decisions was extremely interesting, at least as a concept. I won't spoil it, but what I'll say is that I couldn't exaggerate the scale of what we had the option to do if I tried. And if, big if, that choice affects the rest of your playthrough and compounds with other choices like it, well, that could be really interesting, but unfortunately could is all I can really say until the full game is out. Anyway, I think a good place to wrap this video up would be some quick closing thoughts on the combat. And also, by the way, if you've enjoyed this video and this kind of coverage, I try to be fair but very honest and upfront, then consider leaving a like, as it really helps my content get out there, and consider subscribing if you want. I'll never spam you 1 or 2 videos I probably spend way more time on than necessary each month. Now, what I think is interesting about taking Veilguard's combat for what it is that when I walked into my time with the game, just like with the art direction, I was already well aware of what Veilguard's combat looked like, so my expectations were at post having seen the trailer levels. I mean, we all have eyes, we've all seen those trailers, so
yeah.
When I sat down to play Veilguard, the flashy action combat with way too much happening on screen at times.
Jesus Christ. I assume the only reason why they're doing that or so specifically, right, is to appease the new generation of gamers, right? Because you know how like the new generation people or so, the Gen Z, right? The Gen Z is the most, right? They have that brain rot. They kind of have that bit of a brain rot inside of them, having to have, short attention spans and all of this other shit. They gotta have flashing, gotta have all this flashing shit. Gotta have to jingle a key in front of them or so for them to pay attention and shit. Or have like fucking 4 different videos or so while the main video is talking and everything like that, Honestly, like, I understand that this is supposed to be for the new generation, but man, dude, you're just kind of feeding them and making it far worse, to be honest. That's why me personally, I never bothered, to have a kid or have a relationship or any day, like until like way later, right? Because I know for a fact that I don't want my kid growing up in this generation, to be honest, because I feel like hell no, dude. My kid is gonna enjoy, long form content, like 1 hour let's plays and all that other shit, just like me, because I enjoy listening. I enjoy watching and listening to long forms let's plays, and all that other shit. So like for a good example, right? Forge Labs, right? Forge Labs has like a survive 100 days in like an apocalyptic world or so. Sometimes those videos last for like 3 hours long, and I sometimes just sit down and watch them, while I'm doing something at the end of the day.
Times was not a shock. It was
I
expected.
enjoy watching.
It was
those.
Also not a surprise to see that you can't take full control of your companions anymore and can only call in abilities, because I'd already long since gone through the wow, I really don't like that process when the first gameplay trailer dropped. The best I was hoping for, knowing everything I already did, was some dumb fun. I was going to be playing for 7 hours that day either way, and you know what? I got my dumb fun. Was it the best action game I've ever played? No, but I had a good enough time with Veilguard's combat that it met, or, I'd say exceeded my post having seen the trailer's expectations. It controlled well, the perfect parry was very satisfying, and it helped that throughout the day we were being switched between the 3 different classes of Rogue, Mage, and Warrior, and within those classes you can respec to different builds whenever you want.
Of course.
That obviously kept things really fresh, and with the UI toned down in the settings, I even felt like the "there's too much going on" effect was mostly fixed. Unfortunately, I don't have that footage because we weren't allowed to record much past the first 2 sections of the game where I hadn't turned the UI off yet, but it is what it is. Anyway, I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and
I think it'll do okay in sales. I don't think it's gonna do super great. I know that people that from the old Dragon Age fan base are probably gonna check it out or so, and then they're probably gonna uninstall it afterwards, I don't know. If it plays, if like mechanically wise, right, if it plays alright, I think it'll do alright, but I don't think it's gonna do amazing, Yeah, if you're saying like it's okay combat, it's not the greatest combat in the world, but it's not super awful or anything, Yeah, you are gonna have some people or so who are fans or so that's gonna check the game out, and then like once they play it and then they find out that they don't like it or so, they're just probably gonna uninstall it or refund it, and that's pretty much about it. It's just the problem is the Gen Z is the new people who they want to capture. So unfortunately, Generation Z is the way how they want to capture that fan base. So that's why they always gotta make shit popping up everywhere. Gotta hit that dopamine on the part of your brain or so to be like, ooh, fancy numbers, fancy particle effects, exploding shit here, exploding there. Why do you think the Suicide Squad's UI thing looks fucking atrocious? To be honest, with the whole like fucking everything being on the fucking screen at once. So that's the only thing. So unfortunately, I'm not gonna play this game because number one, right? I don't make that much money around Twitch or so, right? Because everything that I earn from Twitch goes completely back to the stream and everything, which it comes to games, updates, models, or anything add-ons or so for the stream. So I'm not gonna drop $60 on this. Well, $70, I should say. I'm not gonna drop $70 on this game, to be honest. Because you know I don't make that much money, and I don't want to waste my money on that. I'd rather give my money or so to good games, in my personal opinion. And yeah, I kind of figured already as much about it. Honestly, you can literally tell like when you play video games for such a long time, you don't even need to watch a video like kind of like talking about it or anything like that. Just you looking at it specifically from trailers, gameplay, like not even having anyone to tell you that this just looks not great. It just doesn't look great. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. But like I said, I'm not gonna play it. The worst part about it, it's on my anniversary. It's on my anniversary at the end of this month, which is kind of shitty in my personal opinion. But yeah, it is what it is. But anyways, that's the end of the video. You guys can comment, like, subscribe, do all that fancy jazzy stuff, and yeah. It's very interesting, I have to say. Very interesting indeed. No worries, I'll waste my money so you don't have to enjoy the game. I don't know if I'm gonna enjoy this game. I'm probably gonna make fun of it, to be honest. Unless you guys want me to make fun of the game or so and make content out of it, like I can do that, so. Anyone want to gift it to you? I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, that's the end of the video. And yeah, Dragon Age Veilguard. That sure is something, to be honest. And